we got about a minute. I think we have all the planning commissioners we're expecting today. Dun, dun, dun. All right, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the October 6th Planning Commission meeting to order at 6 o'clock on the button. For roll call, I see we are missing Steve Dalton, excused absence. So we have our remaining 4 commissioners are here. I think we can skip a roll call. Make a note here. We like to start each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you'd like to join me, please do. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We don't have any announcements, so we typically start each meeting with oral communications. Do we have anyone here for oral communications today?
We do. We have Brian Blair.
Okay. Comments or questions come on up. I'll finish the little spiel I have to do. Comments or questions during oral communications cannot be addressed to or discussed by the Planning Commission or staff, but can be referred to appropriate staff. So we're not able to take action on what's coming up here, but go for it, man. You got 3 minutes.
Okay. So I've brought this up to, my name's Brian Blair. I've brought this up to in the City Council and to the Traffic and Mobility Commission, but I wanted to bring it up here because I'm understanding the process of how these different areas of local government work. And so I want to just point something out in hopes that it's a consideration in everything that is done and in conversations that happen here in this building. So Quail Gardens Drive between Leucadia Boulevard and Encinitas Boulevard has developed into a very dangerous high-speed cut-through street that needs to be addressed by the city for the safety of the residents who live off of this street. Each morning during rush hour, Quail Gardens becomes, it's a high-speed cut-through, mostly southbound traffic that's trying to circumvent that traffic on the 5 between Leucadia Boulevard and Encinitas Boulevard to the south. The yellow circles in this show all the entrances to the various neighborhoods that are off of this stretch of road. And the 2 red boxes show these 2 new neighborhoods that have been approved by the city, Fox Point and Sunshine Gardens, that have, I think, about 250 and about 140 units each. What's interesting is between this stretch of road, it's about 1.2 miles, there's not a single stop sign, roundabout, not a traffic light, not a speed bump, and it is an insanely dangerous street. And so my hope is to highlight one thing that I have seen as a particular problem that I think is going to be a tremendous liability to the city here very soon. If you'll go to the next slide. The bottom red box represents this apartment unit that's going up. It's Sunshine Gardens. It's beautiful, but that's the entrance to it. And if you go to the 3rd slide, that on the right-hand side is where that entrance is. It's directly across from this cul-de-sac here. And up at the top, you see there's a blind curve. So what happens, this is downhill in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, which of course, nobody goes 35 in this. And it's actually really hard to go 35 as you come down that hill, but it's blind, and cars, I've sat there and watched because there's a little digital signage ahead of that. Cars are typically doing 40 to 50 miles an hour. They come down that hill and it's a blind turn. And so there are going to be wild car accidents in this location when that Sunshine Gardens apartment complex is built. Right in the middle of that where that arrow is, if the city doesn't do something to slow it down. And whatever they decide to do, they're going to have to do something. My hope is that they don't wait for accidents and bodily harm and injury, that they get in front of it and recognize, oh, we need to do something because we're throwing 140 units here and we need to address this. Now, there are other parties in the city. There are other parties in the area that are trying to get the traffic and mobility to listen and city council to listen. I don't know exactly what that process is going to be. I'm trying to learn and be a part of it and be a voice to point out ideas and hopes and hopeful suggestions. But I want to just put this in front of you with some thoughts and hope that it can find its way to the right decision makers who can put it on the budget for consideration next year. with 1 second left.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for listening.
I know the area very well. I live on the other cut-through on Orpheus.
Okay.
So people go one way or the other, depending how lucky they're feeling.
That's right. And for me, what it really comes down to, and I know I'm taking more time, but it's the kids on bikes.
But really, we're not supposed to be discussing this one, but
kids-
Traffic and Mobility Commission, I think, is the logical next step.
Okay.
They can make recommendations to council on things, so I think that's where you should be focusing most of your energy.
Thank you.
And you got friends up here, too.
Appreciate it.
Kevin, we do have one more.
Oh, we do?
speaker. Yep.
Wonderful.
Elena Thompson.
Hi, Elena.
Hi, everyone. Happy fall. I'm Elena Thompson from Leucadia. Thank you for your service. I just wanted to remind you all, as our planning commissioners, in case you forgot, that October 1st, 1986, so 36 years ago, was the anniversary of the city of Encinitas incorporating, okay? And the incorporation certificate, back when Mr. Packard was speaker, is right outside this hallway, okay? Right when you go down the hallway on your way out, it's on the right side. And I'm going to read it to you briefly because all of your positions are super important. You're in charge of the planning as volunteers, so we know how tedious it is, for our city. And it reads, in October 1st, 1986, a new city will be born in my district, the city of Encinitas. This is Mr. Packard speaking. The city of Encinitas incorporates 26 square miles of some of the most beautiful coastline in San Diego County. 44,000 Californians make Encinitas their home. The decision to incorporate was made by 70% of the citizens in order to gain local control of land use issues and to develop a community identity, local control. A great deal of pride went into this important decision, resulting in the incorporation of the largest area in recent California history, this 26 square miles. This proud community has elected its first city council. So that was the incorporation. And the reason, again, that Encinitas incorporated was to gain control from the county so that we could exercise our own land use decisions. And I bring that up because you're talking about SB 9 tonight, and I'm going to stay and be listening to that too. And I would just say that we thank you for really being mindful of this document, why we incorporated, and not think for a moment that because people aren't in this room listening or you didn't get any letters about SB 9 and SB 10 and about other things that you're working on, it doesn't mean that people don't care. Most people don't even know about what's going on, and it's really big stuff. And I'm a realtor, and I can tell you that most real estate attorneys don't have a good grasp of SB 9 and 10. So, you know, when we talk about zoning and we talk about land use and local control, it's a big issue. So I commend you all for being here, doing your jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. We're going to move on, and do we have any changes to the agenda, Anna? Hearing none, let's move on.
Could I respond to that first speaker?
I don't believe where it's proper for us to respond. We can ask
Yeah.
questions. Perhaps.
Well, I wanted to add a comment.
Commissioner Sherrod can make a comment.
Excellent. Go
Okay,
for it.
I just wanted to add a comment that traffic that is on Quail Garden Drive continues onto Westlake. Because every morning I drop my son on Westlake. And so the traffic, it doesn't stop at Encinitas Boulevard. When I come out and try to make my left turn, there are so many cars stacked and coming that they stop usually. And they wave me to come because that's the only way I can get out.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherrod. I know that, actually. I used to do that when I lived in Cardiff. That was my cut-through. Come down, you turn left on Encinitas Boulevard, right on West Lake, and then you're off into back road land. But, yeah, it's a very important issue, and I'm sure it's going to be addressed. It's going to take a couple of years for any of these complexes to open, so the city has time to do things, hopefully. I do need to move on. So next item up is our consent calendar. And next, these items are considered non-controversial or routine in nature. All items, there's only one tonight, are typically voted on collectively in a single motion without any staff presentation, public comment, or deliberation. I could read the rest of this, but I'm going to actually have to pull this item because I have questions concerning it. I'll give the spiel for anyone who's still figuring out how things work here. If a member of the public or a commissioner has requested an item to be pulled, anyone can pull an item from consent calendar, and it will be heard immediately after all the items. As I say, we only have one, which is the Chipotle Type 41 ABC license. It's case number multi 534822, 2022. And I don't really need a full staff presentation. I'd like to ask some questions though of Todd.
Sure.
So Todd, in the past, I know we've had a couple of other outdoor alcohol patios where I recall there was specifications for how it had to be closed off. So you can't just like wander out of the patio with your beer. Is there anything like that in this? Because I know we have the patio that when it was Burger King, it was, very porous.
This one actually is fenced off. I see what you're saying with the drawings, but it is actually fenced. That area is defined as square footage.
Okay.
So
So it will be fenced, and
Correct.
the question would be, is there a legal requirement for it to be fenced, or is that just something that we have required in the past?
ABC actually defines that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. That was pretty much it. I mean, had some concerns about staying open till 11. I don't know if anyone else had any comments on this one since I've pulled it.
I just have a quick one.
Go for it.
Did they they were open before, did they have the same license at their prior location?
I believe so.
Okay, and then along there is, I think Rubio's also has a license right there, as does the Forchetta and the Anna's. So it's really no different. They're asking for the same licenses that other vendors and restaurants along that same strip have.
Or lesser. I mean, the Type 41, it's just beer and wine.
Right.
A Type 47 would be distilled spirits and beer and wine. So this one's just the lesser. It's beer and wine only.
Thank you.
Well, I have no troubles with this. I just had to ask that question. I would make a motion to approve this project and move on. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Robert. So we have a motion and a second. Can we call the question, please? Okay. Pass.
The wrong motion.
Oh, which motion was? So it seems to have passed unanimously. Was that an error? We can fix it. The meeting's still live.
It went under the correct one.
Did you want to vote yes?
Oh, you
I'm fine with my vote.
Okay. So the item passes unanimously with Commissioner Dalton absent. And that was the consent calendar. So we're moving right on. The next part's honestly my favorite part of being on the commission, where we have two items on our regular agenda. They're both policy items. First one is item 8A, which is case number 5199, 2022, and this is the SB 9 implementation ordinance. And we'll go through that, and we'll then get into short-term rental land use after. This is a public hearing to consider an ordinance to add new chapters to Title 24, Title 30 for new development design standards for urban lot splits, and two-unit residential development in single-family zones as allowed under Senate Bill SB 9. Do we have any disclosures? Can't imagine any. No, I'm going to pass this on to Planning Manager Jennifer Gates. Oh, you do? Sorry, Robert.
Earlier this week, I attended the APA, the American Planning Association meeting in Anaheim, and there was lots of discussions of SB 9, lots of breakout seminars that I attended and listened to. So I don't know if that's a disclosure.
No,
but
it's a good one.
It's an FYI, and I heard lots of different opinions on this, and anyway.
Yeah, policy recommendations to council are fun because, we're basically recommending. We're not It's not like our usual cases where we have, our rulings are final.
Right.
So, I'm looking forward to passing this on, actually. But the more knowledge, the better. Let's talk about it. I want to hear what you learn when we get to deliberations.
And I also attended.
You also, rock on. It was fun, wasn't it?
It was.
I mean, I've done 3 of those now, and one of them was it was more for planners, and I didn't have my little ribbon that said I was a commissioner. So I was kind of talking to planners who didn't realize I wasn't and also a planner. It was fun, learned a lot of things. But on to Jennifer Gates, thank you.
No worries. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Jennifer Gates, Planning Manager and Project Planner for the SB9 Implementation Ordinance, otherwise known as our 2-unit development and urban lot split. So before you today is the ordinance that we've been discussing for, I think this is the 4th meeting. So the last 3 meetings on this proposed ordinance, and all of the revised changes that we discussed at the last meeting are in red in this ordinance version before you tonight. Again, just to remind you, this is one other small change. There is a section in Encinitas Ranch specific plan where it calls out every single chapter in our municipal code for some reason. So that was added into the ordinance proposed before you. So this is, again, an ordinance for 2-unit development and urban lot split. This is SB9, which was adopted by the state and doesn't provide an option for the city not to participate, unlike SB10, which allowed the city the option, which the city has not initiated to pursue SB10. SB9 does allow cities to adopt an ordinance to implement the provisions of SB9. There's a lot of, I would call, blank spaces, definitions that are needed, and other requirements that would help implement SB9, including development standards. SB9 specifically requires cities and counties or jurisdictions to ministerially approve a parcel map for an urban lot split or a proposed housing development. And what that means is ministerially approved means it does not go to a public hearing. And even an appeal is not possible because that would require a public hearing. So the only public hearings that would be occurring is if the project required a coastal development permit and it was in the coastal zones appeal zone. And that is specified within this code, how we would implement the coastal development permit regulations. With that, there are 3 options before you tonight. Staff is recommending to recommend approval of this ordinance as amended in the previous meeting. You do have the option to approve with further modifications. You can approve as presented tonight, or you can recommend denial. So again, this is a recommendation to City Council. City Council does have the final authority in adopting an ordinance. After that, if you do recommend approval or denial, it will be heard by City Council, and if City Council recommends adoption, it will go to Coastal Commission for their final review. With that, that concludes staff's presentation, and I am open to any questions that you have in regards to the ordinance.
Thank you. We'll may have questions for you during deliberations, but I think we're very well vetted on this project. I actually went through my notes. We've had 4 meetings on this subject so far, and we had the joint Planning Commission Council meeting, so that's 5 by my count. But at this point, we open the public testimony. Do we have any public speakers on this item? Dina? Yeah. Sorry, I'll wait till you take another sip.
We do. We have 3 speakers this evening. And first up is Karen Caden.
Hello there. Karen Caden. I live in Encinitas. I have read many pages regards to SB, so I'm not unknowledgeable. I am knowledgeable on it, but I have my say, and thank you for letting me get up and speak. And thank you for being here, guys. Okay, dear Planning Commissioners and Chair, SB 9 should not be a current urgency ordinance. Currently, the housing element is in the process for affordable housing. Why not L7, Encinitas public-owned land, can help 100% affordable housing for the low income? Urban lot split is truthfully changing the zoning from single-family to multi-family neighborhoods, adding density, congestion, traffic, and infrastructure concerns. SB 9 does not protect the public health, safety, welfare of the community and takes away our privacy. Changes the peacefulness to additional noise, less open space, structures in view, air quality, and changes to the environment. This bill does not address the state's housing issue as intended, does nothing at all to add affordable housing problem. Please discuss to add notification to neighbors when there is a proposed urban lot split for protection and privacy of our properties. Please do not approve and table for continuance to 2023. Thank you, and save Encinitas from state control. Let's have local control. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who's next, Tina?
Next, we have Dennis Caden.
Good evening. I'm the other Caden, less good-looking and intelligent. Thanks for letting us be here. So, I have a question. One of the things about SB 9 is that it states it may not be used for short-term rentals of 30 days or less. And I'm just curious, can we challenge, how's that going to be enforced? You know, we have a lot of neighbors that get along with one another because you have space, you know, you have open space between one another. And now I see that being a challenge. So who wants neighbors snitching on neighbors? And, you know, can we determine the crime statistics in neighborhoods where there's more rentals than not, especially like 60-day rentals? So if it's you can't have a 30-day or less rental than 31 days and they're legal, but, you know, those create issues. I think staff suggested that Prop A is not applicable. So it states in the agenda that the proposed amendments qualify as a regular amendment under Municipal Code 3000.040 and do not require a public vote. Here's my question, because they do not increase the number of units that may be constructed on any property. I don't get that. I think that's a Prop A issue. If there are 3 homes on R3 neighborhood, 1 home per lot, and then due to SB 9, 3 years from now, there's 6 units on that R3 parcel or neighborhood, how did that not increase the number of units in the neighborhood? So that doesn't make sense to me. The other thing is to prevent the long-term and I think injurious and ruinous atrocities of SB 9 to Encinitas community character, could you therefore ban any creation of new flag lots, and could you assure that any lot split ends up being a perfect rectangle? Because I think the city can determine what the lots look like. And therefore, some people that are kind of jamming things in there, you'd save the neighborhoods if you require certain specifics. I mean, we could come up with some pretty creative rectangles or something. Anyway, prior to the signing of the bill, Governor Newsom was presented with a letter signed by close to 240 cities and the League of California Cities urging him to veto the bill. I mean, for 240 cities to take the time to say, please don't do this, I mean, somebody thought it didn't make sense besides us here. Let's see. So via the petition to oppose SB 9 from Redondo Beach, Torrance, Carson, and Whittier, and they're all way more densely populated. Crap. Okay. Could you encourage the fire marshal to
Finish it up.
expand the
It's okay.
boundaries? Okay. I mean,
Just a sentence or two.
Okay, could you encourage the fire marshal to expand the boundaries of our designated high fire zones and determine the remaining parts of the city a complete fire hazard zone to deter the regulation of this bill? I see it as a health hazard with only a 4-foot setback.
Sir, I think you're going to have to call it.
All right,
And
thank
you're
you.
kind of outside our purview with the fire.
All right.
Do we have a third speaker? I'm assuming.
We do have a few more. We have Elena Thompson, followed by Dina Kerr, and then Dolores Welty.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, hi, I'm back.
Yep.
Elena Thompson, Leucadia resident. I'm not here to debate or argue the merits of SB 9. I think it's a pretty atrocious bill, and that's why the state is being sued, and there's so many lawsuits from cities about this bill. But another thing I want to just call out is that I noticed on the mission statement of the city of Encinitas online, it says that the city is proudly committed to providing the highest level of service to our communities and the people we serve by protecting life, property, and the environment. SB 9 does not protect life, property, or the environment. In fact, they're finding that it is probably going against California property rights. So the jury's not out on SB 9. What I'd like to ask you all to do tonight is the options that Jennifer gave you to either approve this or deny this. I think you should deny it tonight. Push the pause button on this. We do not have to be the first city to embrace this. As she said, we said no to SB 9. We don't have to implement it. You do not have to pass this tonight and should not. Now, our mayor, in all of her ads right now, says that she wants to stand up for us. Have you seen her ads on TV? They say, stand up for you. I'm asking you guys as the Planning Commission to please stand up for the residents of Encinitas, those that are aware of this and those that are not aware of this. This is destructive. To have a bill where someone can not only divide the lot next door to my Leucadia lot in two and add a total of 4 units, 2 per side, and only have a setback of 4 feet and not offer parking, you know this deserves denial tonight. You do not have to advance it. Please do not. Decades of thoughtful zoning, planning, processes, and procedures throughout the state and in this city to protect community character and property rights are being tossed out the window with this bill. And again, that's why people are suing over this and cities are suing over this. I've listened to cities' mayors speak at online webinars saying that their planning departments do not even have the capacity to take on the work that this bill involves, much less the city of Encinitas, already completely overtaxed, the staff overworked, our inability to keep up with all the other RHNA housing numbers we have. Again, push the pause button, folks. This state takeover and state dictates and mandates from Sacramento, they're not welcome by the taxpayers. We did not vote for these things. And in fact, most of the legislature that adopted these horrible laws don't even own their own homes. They don't know what it costs to pay a mortgage, pay property taxes, pay for land upkeep.
Elena, I'm gonna have to stop
again, thank you, but please vote no, deny this tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Next up is Dina Kerr.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and for listening to us. I live in Leucadia, and we added onto our house. And these planners refused to let me build 4 foot into the setback by 8 foot when I added onto my house. It was just going to bring my new addition up level with the original house from 1928. But you wouldn't let me build that 4 foot by 8 foot land because you said it was going to impact the community. So if you won't let me build 4 foot by 8 foot to come, you know, my old house was built here, and I had to build back here when I put the addition on. That's just 4 foot by 8 foot. You guys are so careful. I really question how you can allow these ADUs to come in when you would stop and prohibit me just 20 years ago from gaining another 4-foot by 8-foot covered property. I don't, I've never felt so intruded on until I read this bill. I feel like I've lost so much control that this could be put forward as an individual person, buying a property, paying taxes on it, seeing what the zoning was at the time we purchased it, and diligently and lawfully listening to this planning and zoning. And you guys did me a favor. You made me put in a skylight. I really appreciate that. Operable. So I know you guys do a good job here. And in your hearts and in your education, I know you can see the fallacies here. I know that you can see the troubles coming. I live right off of Vulcan. We can't even walk safely down that street. My kids couldn't. We still can't. We've been here since 1994. Time to take care of that and protect the property that I'm paying taxes on today. Please do not pass this. Do not put your stamp of approval on here. You're going to have a lot of people so disappointed and unhappy. And I have been looking forward to retirement, and now I'm looking for another place because I don't think that this is going to serve me. And I can see neighbors who've built just little granny flats right up to my back fence and then rented them out illegally and having strange people looking over the fence, smoking their pot and saying good morning to me. And that's legal. I don't want more of that kind of legal building going on where there's really no oversight. The other question I have is, I know that the ADUs cannot be used as short-term rentals, but can the owner live in the ADU while renting out their house? Is that a way that they can get around that? Anyway, I know my time's up, so thank you so much for listening.
Our final speaker is Dolores Welty.
Dolores Welty, also in Leucadia. Nice to see you all. And I do appreciate the conscientious work that the Planning Commission does. And I greatly resent having our local land control lifted away from us by dictatorial processes in the state of California. Many people I know will not vote for Governor Newsom for any reason since he signed this bill. This will change registration in certain areas and by certain people. It might not make a difference. It's making a difference in my community and the people that I know. Local land use and the oversight of it is the reason we have a city. It's the reason we have a city. It's the reason we incorporated. It's the whole reason I'm here tonight to tell you, if you don't have to pass this, don't do it. Good God.
Thank you, Dolores. Is that it, Tina?
That is the conclusion of our public speakers.
That's it for public speakers, okay.
Yes.
I'm going to close public comment for now. And sorry about that. Got the little instinct with that. I'm going to close public comment, and we're going to move on to commission deliberation. And we probably have some questions for Jennifer, and I'll see, do we have any commissioners have anything to say on this subject? I mean, I could say a couple of things real quick, and this is also a kind of a question, because it's my understanding that SB 9 is already in effect. It's a state law, and every township, every county is affected by it. And the ordinance we're putting in place is basically going to put some restrictions around it, legal restrictions that we can. I think that's correct, isn't it, Anna? So, I mean, there's already SB 9 applications here in Encinitas. And this is not something we can stop. So we've been given this thing from state, and we are obligated to, we could let it go. We could, if we deny this, it defaults to the state law, which is very open-ended and has no restrictions whatsoever. And that's what frightens me. So it'd be great if this would be stopped. I mean, I agree about local control, but here we're down the pecking order here. State makes laws that affect everyone in the state. City makes laws that affect the different regions here. I mean, we're small players here, but this ordinance will put some restrictions on it. We'll allow, we'll discuss this, but that was my main comment I wanted to make, because not everyone understands. They think we can just deny SB 9. We can't. It's not up to us. That would be the state Senate. SB is the Senate, right? Okay, I'm going to stop now and see if anyone else wants to. Any comments? And then we can look through the red lines.
I can jump in real quick too. I just wanted to kind of reiterate those comments, because I think that what we're trying to do is take what we have in front of us and do the best thing that we can with the regulations that we have. And I think that it's important for us, and we have spent a lot of time. We've had 5 meetings with tonight on this, and I think we're trying to be as thorough as we can and trying to make just the best decisions that we can, given the umbrella of the law that we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
So we just wanted to let you all know I appreciate you all being here tonight, and I do understand your concerns, and I live in your community. And I think that, like you said, we're trying to come up with the best solutions and make the right decisions within the framework of the law that we've been provided by the state. And I think that if you've gone through the document, we have added in some things. We've added in some requirements for low-income housing under one unit being low-income housing under certain circumstances. And we've added in provisions regarding permeable surfaces versus non-permeable to try to protect the environment. So in those places where we have room, we are trying to do all of those things.
Thank you, Chris.
I believe other cities in the area have adopted ordinances already under the SB 9 to try to, as Commissioner Ryan spoke of, in the envelope that we have to work with, under the mandates and the laws that we have, what can we do the best that we can do for local control, whether it's permeable surfaces or mandating a certain area of the space to be green or trees or roofs that can be environmentally conscious. We're doing the best we can to mirror our climate action plan with our environmental obligations that's stated that you've brought up. We're doing the best we can with the envelope that we do have. Open to suggestions. We can always amend. The city council, I guess, can always amend the ordinances if there's a gap or a mistake that can get flushed out along the way. It's brand new. And it's, to your point, Commissioner Doyle, there already are applications under submission now. So if we don't put something in place, then we're subject to this grayer area that we lose control. So we're trying to get as much control as we can. If there's something that you see in the ordinance that you want to adjust, I think there's ways that the city and the staff can implement those. But at the moment, our hands are kind of tied. We're doing the best we can given the circumstances.
Yeah, and to be fair to us and to Jennifer Gates, we've put in a lot of restrictions. Right now, it's second floor setbacks. With state, you can build 4 feet, 2 stories tall, 4 feet from the edge of your property. That's not necessarily required. With the ordinance we got in place, our second floor setback, if it overlooks another property, has to be 15 feet. Or I think maybe it's the setback that it's the original setback. Is that correct, Jennifer?
It's a step back, but yes.
It is stepped back. So I mean, we've been at, this is meeting number 5 for us going over this. And we've thought long and hard about what can we get away with to mitigate this and kind of keep this under control. We can't stop it. It's a runaway horse, so we're just, putting blinders on and trying to keep it as, and, we also have to follow council's dictates. But I didn't really have a point running here. Susan?
I'd like to add a few words. First of all, the state in the hierarchy can tell us to do things, and we have no choice because we're at the bottom of the pyramid, and the state is the authority at the top. For example, when I was getting ready to take my architectural exam, the state wrote its own exam. And so California, all of a sudden, instead of taking the ARE, I had to quickly retool and study for a whole different series of exams. Similar, but still kind of shocking. And then, after I had been licensed for quite a long time, the state said that we have to now do 5 hours of ADA study, and it has to be done every time that we renew our license. I had no choice, even though when I became licensed, there was no such rule. And I understand also your situation where you may have been denied project. It happens. And there are some cities that may grandfather certain conditions. I am not sure if we have the ability with SB 9 to grandfather your project, but I think we could, perhaps.
Well, it would have to be a lot split. It would have to be a lot split, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
It's,
I suppose,
I don't
if-
think we can really solve that problem tonight. I understand the frustration. Yeah, no,
I suppose
felt-
that
it felt
we
unfair.
could explore the possibility that certain projects would meet certain criteria that do the lot split would be grandfathered, perhaps. I don't know all of the legal means of doing it and all of the planning department rules
God, I don't know
for that
how
kind of grandfathering, but I am aware that some cities will grandfather certain types of projects. And I would love to help you do that if we possibly can. And with respect to what everyone else has said, we don't have a choice because the state already passed this bill. And so all we're doing here are some procedural tweaks that will make it easier for our city to be aligned with this rule that they have to follow. I would like to add my own thoughts, which are separate from addressing public. My own thoughts about this are that it's actually a way for families to build wealth, and I wish you had been allowed to do that historically. I do believe that building additional units may be difficult for some. They're barely making their house payment as it is. But if they can afford to borrow and build and pass that on in their family, it is a way to build wealth. I do also see the potential for investment developers to buy up land that is currently zoned residential and could be split. They have made a provision that you have to be owner-occupied for at least 3 years after your project in order to prevent that from happening. So I am hopeful that it will be prevented from happening. But I do think if we allow an ADU or JADU in addition to these, that it should be affordable to prevent and ensure the intent and spirit of this bill is met.
Thank you, Susan. That was well said. I had a couple of questions. Mr. Caden brought up a couple of points that I wanted to address, and one of them was concerning the SB9s. How do we ensure that they do not become short-term rentals? And the very next item on our agenda is our brand-new short-term rental ordinance, where enforcement is one of the main topics there. So there are ways. We know who the unlicensed Airbnbs are. We just haven't quite figured out what to do with them, and we'll be talking about that relatively soon, tonight. The other thing was, Jennifer, can you explain to me, and probably there's other people are asking, why exactly is Prop A not applicable? Does the state law put something in there to say we can't have any local ordinances that affect this? Do you know? Or Anna?
Like the density bonus law, we can have implementation ordinances, and the state law sets the rules. And so local restrictions such as Prop A would not be applicable.
I heard a why not from the audience.
It's not considered a project.
Well, that's the CEQA. It's not considered a project under CEQA, but as far as Prop A is concerned, it's not. They, my understanding is it's like density bonus law, and that it is the law, and we have to allow for increased density with single-family residential zones.
Yeah, I assumed it was, again, the state laws overrule our own, but I know Prop A was defended in court, and, geez, what was the last? They just won a case on that. Do you remember anything about that, Anna? But I'm going to take the word of staff that it is not applicable tonight, and because I can see why. Let's see. We did discuss, do we need to pass this tonight? Elena Thompson had asked that, and I think we should be passing something tonight, because this is really just mitigation measures.
So you have to recommend approval with modifications, or recommend denial. It needs to move forward
Should we,
in one way or another.
should we take a look at page 10 and just like quick flip through it? I don't have it. We can just look at the red line changes.
I have a question.
Go for
She
it.
gave us 3 options. Are we unable to continue because we're at a limit of some kind? Why is continuance not one of the 4 options she gave us? Approval with modifications, or denial?
That's a good question. I know there are certain projects where 5 is the limit.
Okay.
But those I thought were like housing element sites.
So
So we could
There's
conceivably have
not a limit if there's a request for continuance, but there needs to be a reason to continue the project and not make a recommendation. Because at the end of the day, city council is the deciding body, the hearing body. So city council initiated this, and we're,
But did city council put a time limit on it?
there's no time limit in that sense. It's just, if you do request a continuation, there needs to be a reason for that, is my understanding. Sorry, Tarquin keeps leaning forward, so I'm not sure if he was going to, our city attorney was going to say anything.
I'd like to point out, currently the state law applies to development under SB 9. If the city wishes to have any form of local control pursuant to SB 9, the Planning Commission must act, make a recommendation one way or the other to the city
You
council.
speak a bit closer to your mic.
Sure, sorry about that. What I was saying, if the city wishes to have any form of local control under SB 9, rather than the state law just being implemented as written, the Planning Commission does need to make a recommendation one way or another to the city council, so the city council can take action.
And is there a deadline?
There's not a specific deadline, but at some point the city council can just take the refusal or the failure to make a recommendation and just go ahead and act upon the ordinance at some point.
So there's not a time limit. We can continue if we want to, with their reason, but there's nothing telling us that we have to. Well, saying is that we were given 3 options, but there is a 4th option. And a 4th option would be to continue, and we could then vote on the continuance if necessary.
You could continue. I would advise against continuing it too much longer.
Understood. The other question that was brought up was regarding fire hazard maps, and I believe those are done by the state and CAL FIRE. I don't know if the city has a lot of input, or could somebody opine on terms of how those maps are designed and if we have local input into that?
So that would be the fire department, that's their division, so that's not something that planning can get involved with.
Okay.
But we can make a request to bring you back more information on their process of determining that. But there's already a process in place. It would have to be, a formalized modification on how that process goes.
So the state sets the actual map for very high fire zones.
Right.
And then the local jurisdiction could then adopt that. And then our jurisdiction has adopted it and with some additional zones added to it.
And when was the last time that happened?
I'd have to look at the date. I can't remember, but it is in our municipal code.
I think it was relatively recently, because this came up during some of the housing element discussions.
Right.
Where because we have a fire mitigation plan in place, then, maybe it's not a mitigation, because we have a fire evacuation plan or at city level done, then now we can't really stop any developments in this area because we have a plan.
Right.
So I'm assuming that, and that was from state law. So I think, I don't know. I guess we could have not done a fire.
No, I was just curious on when the last one was done, if there's an annual, just like there's a community plan update, there's a specific cycle to it. Clearly, we're in a different climate, zones these days, so.
I believe CAL FIRE is currently in the process of updating the map because of all the new fire areas. And then once that is done, then I could foresee that fire would then adopt that with whatever updates that they would like to make at that time. Sure. So probably in the next couple of years, you'll see it. You, Planning Commission, would not see it,
Right.
but City Council would.
Okay, thank you.
Now, does the SB 9, is there any adoptions for high fire zones?
No, so SB 9
anywhere.
specifically states that you can prohibit within a very high fire zone. However, they are allowed as long as they meet the building code standards that are set for very high fire zones. And that same is for the flooding as well. So those areas specifically are called out in the ordinance, or in the state law rather, that as long as there are building codes in place that allows that development, then that development can be allowed. So right now, we do have building code standards that have been adopted for very high fire zones.
Great. That's answered my questions. Shall we just page through this? I think there's things I would like to highlight as we go. Just, there's not much to talk about. I know one of the things that I was very pleased, and Jennifer, it's great working with you. You hit all my notes when I was going over our last meeting. An interesting one was where we struck section E, where an application for an urban lot split, the applicant had to file an application with plans for a 2-unit residential development, which basically eliminated most people, who aren't developers sitting on piles of money. So the reason I wanted to see that gone was that it would allow anyone here in the audience who has a single-family lot, to split it and basically sell the other lot and let them worry about it. They would inherit all the restrictions that go with an SB 9 lot that is created in this manner, because you can't do the same things with an SB 9 lot that you can build a duplex and you can build 2 ADUs, but how was it? You can't, they'll never be Airbnbs. They're banned from that, in our ordinance at least. So we've done our best, but this was the only one I saw that opened this up to normal people. You don't need to have an architect who can design $200,000 plans for 2 different duplexes and go through all of that when you really just want to split the lot. And it would meet the state's requirements, and yeah, it's not perfect, but it is what it is. I don't really have a lot of comments on this other than Jennifer really, I think, nailed all our comments. I'll pass it on to anyone who wants to say anything right now. We could go through this, or we could just approve this as it is. This is pretty much all of the recommendations we made at our last meeting, which was number 5 by my count. Hold on, one moment. I'm gonna open public comment for a moment, and I'm gonna call. Come on up. Come on up.
I literally have spent 42 minutes at the stop sign of Leucadia and Vulcan, trying to get through between the train, people being backed up for one reason or another in the morning. I've been late to work because of that.
Yep.
Getting around that little Issy curve and having the new big hotel with lots and lots of people entering and leaving there. I really thank you so much for the 4-way stop that you put in. I mean, the 3-way stop you put in, that's made my life easier. But I don't see how safely you can add additional ADUs where we can hardly safely get in and out now, and never have been able to. So that's all I wanted to say is that does road safety count at all?
Thank you for that. I'm going to close public comment again. Sorry for that break from decorum. That's not, I really, a new person, come on up. I'm reopening public comment. Come on up here. You got 3 minutes.
My name is
Oh, yeah.
Sheila.
Can you, we're going to need you to fill out one of the speaker slips. It
I'm
looks,
so sorry.
that's okay.
You can do it after
It'll look
the
like
fact.
this.
That's fine.
Someone else can don't worry, as long as it's passed in, we have to keep records of who speaks.
I so apologize
No
for
worries.
that.
Pull the mic a little closer to your fit.
Yes. Hi. This SB 9 is I'm pretty sure you guys know, is being embattled all across the state of California. And there's all kinds of coalitions. They wanted to put, something on the ballot, but it did not work. So when Kevin mentioned the possibility of a continuance, that seems to be a prudent thing to do at this juncture. We've got voting coming, we've got a lot of things going. And I've researched this a lot. I do have to give great kudos to Jennifer. She is awesome, and she's done her due diligence. However, there's still a lot to be discovered, and it would be in all of your best interests to place a continuance, which I was very grateful that Kevin mentioned that, because this requires a lot more serious investigation to the ramifications, and I'm not going to get in all the details, but I think most of you have a rudimentary understanding of SB 9, SB 10, but I think most people do not. And you have a small amount of people here, but we represent a lot of people. So I would just encourage you to consider the continuance and have a lot more thoughtful process before you just sign this, because it could set a very dangerous precedent. And you have to compare our city with other cities all over the state. So I recommend highly that you reconsider this. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't even know if I'm just going to leave public comment open for now. Personally, I don't know if that's really a good option for us. I think continuing this item, not pushing this through, I mean, these are the mitigation measures. the state law is a hideous law. Most of the laws are not written by planners, not written by anyone who's ever worked in a planning commission, and they like to take our multi-page nuanced documents and boil them down to a page and a half. So we then are allowed to add another 10 pages to kind of put a couple of reins on it. So I'm not going to be in support of a continuance on this.
I have a question for staff.
Oh.
Did we, in the wording, include the affordability of ADUs if they added ADU?
Yes, that was, as discussed in the last meeting, is still included as a recommendation in this ordinance.
I would like to make a motion that we adopt the resolution.
Thank you. Have a second?
Is that with the changes recommended by staff tonight?
Concerning the Encinitas Ranch specific plan?
Yes, and then the red cross-outs and the additions?
Mm-hmm.
asking-
Susan, are you okay with that as a friendly amendment? I learned
So
that.
it's to adopt the resolution with the edits that were made to the document.
Exactly, with the documents.
Yes, I'd second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Whoops, I clicked away. Let's call the question. The motion passes unanimously with Steve Dalton absent. Thank you all. I mean, we know how serious this is, and we are, we get these things, they come down the pike, and we do our best to rein them in. And I think we've done we didn't rush this through. This is meeting number 5 for us. And it's as nuanced and controlled as it can be. If a state effort is put in place and SB 9 is revoked, then I'm pretty certain that the city of Encinitas will revoke this new ordinance as well. But for now, this item's on. It'll be showing up at council. This is a recommendation we're making. So council will be to do the final approval. So I think they're going to be aware that we've put a lot of time in this too, but there might be some changes, and there will be another chance for you to speak with people one step up in the pyramid. So thank you. I'm going to call this item closed. And this all the time. I'm sorry about that. We are going to move on to our next item, which is item 8B. And this is another policy case, 5297-2022. And this is short-term rental land use regulations. This is a public hearing to consider an ordinance for proposed amendments to Title 30 and to add a new chapter, 30.50, titled Short-Term Rental Land Use Regulations, which would also amend our city's local coastal program. And any disclosures on this? Can't imagine any. I'm going to pass this over to Melinda Dacey, Planner 4, for a staff presentation.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair, Planning Commissioners, members of the public. I'm Melinda Dacey, the staff planner working on the city's short-term rental ordinance updates. And I just wanted to provide the Planning Commission with a brief background. So essentially, the city's had short-term rental program in place since 2006. And back in 2001, in March, the City Council initiated a series of code amendments, and staff brought forth changes to our existing short-term rental permit regulations back in October of last year. And during that meeting, the City Council directed staff to return to them with a data-driven analysis to identify a means to establish a maximum number of short-term rentals within the city, and to also research whether an adjoining owner or tenant provide consent to approve an STR. So at that meeting, the City Council provided direction to staff to move forward with a local coastal program amendment and adopted Resolution 2022-38 to initiate the proposed amendments that are before you this evening. So based on the direction that staff received from City Council, they requested that we establish a 3% maximum cap on non-hosted short-term rentals citywide, a 5% maximum cap on non-hosted short-term rentals west of the I-5 in the specific communities of Leucadia, Cardiff by the Sea, and Old Encinitas. They also requested that staff establish a 200-foot radius distance between non-hosted short-term rentals. This was because of public testimony that the council had received that the proximity of non-hosted rentals impact the residential neighborhoods in the city. City Council also directed staff to exclude the Sea Bluff community in Leucadia from the requirements that are proposed to establish regulations for the units west of I-5. And this was because of public testimony that the City Council had received that that community specifically has had a history of vacation rentals. They have their own private regulations that regulate vacation rentals within the community. Staff had also proposed including a grandfather clause for the existing non-hosted short-term rentals, and that City Council also provided the direction to move forward with that. City Council also did not want us to pursue a requirement for an adjoining neighbor's consent on a permit application to operate a short-term rental. As part of the policy direction, staff is also going to be proposing a extension of the permit life from 1 year to 3 years. So currently, short-term rental permits have to get an annual renewal. And we also, because of the extension to 3 years, propose that a short-term rental permit would be revoked if there's any inactivity for a consecutive 12-month period. And so part of our data analysis that we presented to City Council was to set the cap for non-hosted short-term rentals based off of the total residential units within the city. Additionally, the city has 18 hotels. 2 of them are not operating. We have 801 hotel rooms. The median nightly rate was $143, with seasonal fluctuations ranging from $82 to $218. Short-term rentals for median whole home rental, which is suspected to be non-hosted, is a $388 amount, whereas the median portion of a home that is a hosted, assumed hosted unit is approximately $100. So this California Coastal Commission has an approximate affordable overnight rate that they recommend as being $130, and based off of that rate, a majority of our hotel rooms do have the affordable overnight accommodations, whereas some of the whole home rentals do not meet that affordability requirement. However, in recent discussions with coastal staff, they did want us to point out that that's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison, because the hosted or non-hosted short-term rentals also have more than one room availability and more than one bed available to people that want to rent out the unit. As part of the analysis, we went ahead and mapped all of the short-term rentals that are permitted and under review to get a graphic representation of where these are occurring in the city and where the impacts are also occurring based off of the locations of the short-term rentals. And part of what staff needed to do after the City Council direction was received back in April was to gather the data on how many hosted and non-hosted units that we do have. We have about 93% reporting right now, and so we have a total of 339 non-hosted short-term rentals within the city that are permitted and under review with the city staff. And so that 3% citywide cap for non-hosted short-term rentals would result in a total maximum of 798 non-hosted rentals within the city. That would allow for 459 additional non-hosted short-term rentals citywide. And so this table 1 was also included within the staff agenda report, and it breaks down the number of residential units citywide, but also provides us a little snapshot of how many residential units are in each community in relation to how many non-hosted short-term rentals there are in each community. And essentially, the 3% comes from the percent of non-hosted short-term rentals in relation to the estimated residential units. So if you see on the table, we're about 1.27% of non-hosted short-term rentals to the estimated residential units. And the 3% is also recommended so that the city has the ability to still allow growth of the short-term rentals that are non-hosted, while also putting into place some regulations to help protect the residential neighborhoods. Part of the impacts that we observed was that a majority of the non-hosted short-term rentals are occurring west of the I-5. And so the idea was to place a 5% cap on those communities that are west of the 5. And that cap was based off of, again, the estimated residential units that are in those communities west of the I-5, and to also still allow growth for non-hosted short-term rentals. The Coastal Commission sees non-hosted short-term rentals or short-term rentals in general as a means for the general public to access the city's coastline, and they don't necessarily want to see over-restrictive ordinances in place. And so this map just shows a sampling of the 200-foot radius between non-hosted short-term rentals. And because there are some that do overlap, that is why the ordinance before the Planning Commission does include a grandfathering clause, so that these short-term rentals can still come through the city and get a renewal so long as, you know, they're meeting the city's requirements for operating and they haven't gone through any type of revocation process in the past. And so the proposed code amendments before you this evening, one of them is to add a new municipal code chapter 30.50 to Title 30, and it will be titled Short-Term Rental Land Use Regulations. And it contains just 4 subsections for the intent and purpose and findings, provides some definitions specific to the chapter, as well as the special regulations that implement the policy direction that City Council provided to staff. And then the enforcement section of that ordinance is also a duplication of our existing enforcement section in our chapter 9.38 for short-term rentals. And some additional proposed amendments is to update the transient habitation unit definition to remove the single family or duplex units reference from that definition, and to also update the zoning use matrix to remove the transient habitation use from that table. And that is proposed because the transient habitation unit definition specifies hotel, motel, cabin, or campground places, and the matrix table already has the uses identified for hotel and motel separately from the habitation unit. And staff had also prepared a memorandum for the Planning Commission tonight. As we were preparing for the meeting, noted that there are some specific plan amendments that need to be incorporated. And those were depicted in the revised Planning Commission resolution as read. And those are to, again, add a specific chapter reference to the Encinitas Ranch specific plan, as well as to remove the transient habitation use from the table in the Cardiff by the Sea specific plan area. And so next steps for the process, if Planning Commission is supportive of the proposed ordinance this evening, we would take the update to City Council review for adoption. And that is anticipated to be in November and December of this year. And shortly thereafter, the local coastal program amendment would be required to be submitted to the California Coastal Commission. So we aren't anticipating having that being done until the end of this year or beginning of next year, depending on adoption. And with that said, that concludes staff's presentation. Recommended action is to conduct the public hearing and adopt resolution number PC 2022-22. Recommending City Council adopt the draft City Council ordinance as amended in the memorandum provided to Planning Commission this evening.
Thank you, Melinda. Do we have questions?
I have a question.
Go for it.
So I have a question about the 5% cap for communities west of the 5. Was that 5% a number that was given to you by city council? That was a directive?
So when we met with City Council back in April, at that time, staff had presented the combined hosted and non-hosted short-term rental unit data because we didn't have the non-hosted unit data separately. And at that point in time, the percentages of the short-term rentals in relation to the residential units was pretty close to 4%. So the 5% was to allow that additional growth at that point in time.
Okay, so the Sea Bluff, I know that they're removed from this because they have their own separate rules, but are those units, I think it was 57 units currently within the Sea Bluff community, are those counted toward the 5% within the coastal zones?
Based off of the council's direction, those would be excluded.
Okay, so I'll save my comments for discussion then regarding that. For staff.
Sorry.
I have a quick question. I don't
Go
know if
for
this
it,
is for
Robert.
discussion or is this for now, so I'll ask it anyway and you can tell me. You referenced the various specific plans for Encinitas Ranch and Cardiff by the Sea specific plans. So is the ordinance that is being contemplated going to supersede those specific plans?
So the Encinitas Ranch specific plan is adding the chapter, since this is a new chapter. It wasn't part of when that specific plan was being proposed. And because there are single-family and two-family residential units within that specific plan area, the ordinance would allow for those uses. And so this is just to kind of marry the code update with the specific plan.
Wouldn't that require public discussion to amend their specific plan? So you're adding a code that specific community hasn't had a chance to see yet, unless they're seeing it now.
Yeah, so it's just to reference the chapter itself. So it's just like the SB 9 that you just heard. The update to the specific plan is to include the chapter reference to the short-term rental regulations for land use.
All right, let me dumb it down for myself. So if there's no comments in their specific plan to short-term rentals, this will be passed and this will be added on so that it will have short-term rentals in a place where right now it might not have them.
They're allowed right now under Chapter 9.38 because it's a single family or a duplex unit. And because we're adding this new chapter for land use regulations, we would need to have that also be incorporated into the specific plan document.
Okay, thank you.
Linda, I have a couple of questions. I'm trying to figure out just how many STRs we have. I look on page 3 of the staff report, it says we've got a combined total of 516 STRs with another 117 unpermitted. And yet, when I look at the chart in the piece that's been presented to us, it's only 339, and then discounted further for the, well, actually, no, that's the west of 5. But I look at the total on page 4, and it's 339. So, I mean, and I'm concerned also about the 117 unpermitted STRs that have been identified by host compliance. And I was going to ask, so I had multiple questions. First is like, just how many are there? And the other one is concerning regulation of these units. We've isolated 117 unpermitted units. Is host compliance, is that like a service we lease? What is host compliance?
Yeah, so host compliance is the city's short-term rental monitoring platform. So they do monitor all of the listing websites, so Airbnb, VRBO,
Okay.
the whole slew
That's
of
great.
all of those
I was
websites.
really hoping we had that.
So based off of their review, they can track when a short-term rental starts to show activity on the websites. And when they do that, they have to go through an identification process to identify the specific location of those non-permitted units. And as they go through that process, the city ends up sending out courtesy notices to let these people know that they're operating without a permit, and the city regulates those, and that they need to come into compliance and obtain a permit from the city. And so there's a enforcement process that we have in place currently to get the unpermitted units to come into compliance with our city code.
Okay. Can that same process be used to police the SB 9 lots that are not allowed to have short-term rentals? Because they'll turn up under host compliance.
Yes, and that's if they advertise for that. However, the ADUs and any units that get developed under SB 9, they would have their own document recorded against the title of the property saying that they're prohibited from short-term rentals. And so if that is the case, when we do an investigation, then staff would tell them that they would need to cease operation because they're violating that requirement that's on their title of their property.
Okay, this just answers my question. So host compliance is an application that we run here, which trolls these sites and hunts down unpermitted short-term rentals, and that's not sure. So who on staff? What
It's
department
a
would that be
third-party provider that the city has a contract with. So it's Host Compliance Granicus Solutions.
They go to code enforcement then?
They work in partnership with code enforcement.
Okay, well, that's a larger discussion than we have here. Because I do want to, from the start, I've wanted to police these because they pop up like crazy. I mean, I love the whole concept. I had a second question concerning, you mentioned the short-term rentals that were full house and they were discounted. They had a value of $388.30 per night, which was too high to be affordable. And I mean, I've been using Airbnb for a decade or more now, it seems, and we travel as a family. I'll meet my brother and his wife, my sister and her husband, and, we'll get 8 people there, and 8 hotel rooms is way more expensive than one Airbnb house. I mean, so whole house rentals for us has been the affordable option, and I'm just wondering, do we get credit for like the affordable housing that we are creating? I mean, why does that matter, that's not listed as affordable housing? Or any ideas on that? I've got a whole section here and I was just couldn't wrap my head around it.
The nightly rate is what we had available to us. I don't know in relation to the median, what the median bedroom count is of the short-term rentals.
Right.
Or the maximum occupancy allowed. So those are other things that we would need to collect the
Mentioned
data
earlier in
on
your
to be able to analyze
presentation,
that.
was it Coastal Commission that had questioned that? Or
Yeah,
somebody?
so staff met with coastal staff yesterday to kind of go over the proposed amendments, and they had wanted us to clarify to you all that it isn't necessarily an apples-to-apples comparison when you have a hotel room that charges a certain rate, whereas the whole home rental has potentially more than 1 bedroom and more than 2 occupancy per room type of situations. So I just wanted to clarify that for the commission.
Okay, and back to the original question though, is how many STRs? 516 or 339?
So we have 516 that are permitted and under review. This is a combination of the hosted short-term rentals, non-hosted short-term rentals, and then we have about 37 that we don't have that data on yet. So it's a combination of those 3. And the
Okay.
339 is the total non-hosted units, which the regulations are proposed to be addressing on those types of units specifically.
So if we do manage to bring those 117 unpermitted STRs into the fold, now we're at 633, which is what we're targeting, 797, 798? So that's 165 left.
You
I
have,
mean,
you have to know the mix on the
That is
117.
assuming that they're all non-hosted units, though. So
Right,
there would
right.
be a mix of them potentially being hosted versus non-hosted.
And the percentage there has been, what, 50-50?
It's about 65 for non-hosted is the percentage compared to the hosted.
Okay. But it'll still Honestly, I'm not a big fan of non-hosted short-term rentals, although they're the ones I usually stay in. You know, maybe it's a little YIMBY of me, but we have plenty. We are a tourist destination, and people want to come and stay. Yeah, I'm glad that I've watched council's meeting again, and I love that we really dove into the non-hosted units, which I had to look up non-hosted units. Wish that was in the staff report, but that one's got non-hosted units. Means that if you're renting your house while you go to France for a month, you have to be there while it's being rented. So maybe your house 11 months out of the year, but it's still, if you go away, it's a non-hosted unit. Is that correct? By your understanding?
Yeah, that's correct. A hosted unit would be there's owner occupancy on the site or immediately adjacent to.
For the duration of the stay?
Absentee ownership would be a non-hosted unit.
Right, so you can't just like skip off for a month and go to France. Or you could, but you couldn't. Well, actually, you could skip off for a month because 31 days, you're good, right? Okay, I'm going to turn the...
Just
Go
to
for it.
quickly clarify, our total number we're looking at right now is 516 that are permitted. Does that include the ones in Seabluff?
The 516 does include the Sea Bluff community count. So if you take those out, which is 59 units.
Oh, so those have been removed already from the 516?
No, they have not.
Oh, they have not, okay. And then we have 117, so that are not permitted right now. It seems like I understand. Thanks.
Yeah, there's still a buffer. Robert, I see is that you?
Oh, no, I'll wait for the dialogue to go back, the banter.
Okay. Chris? No? Okay. Well, we should step through this. I still cannot hear you.
Public comment.
Oh, public comment is, I will close it. Do we have any public comments here yet? We're good for now? I'm
We
going to
do.
close public. Oh, come on up. Have I already heard from you on this one?
No, not
I
this
have
one.
not. I'm very sorry. Geez, that was the question section. Sorry, Melinda.
So as to the special plan, you answered about the Olivenhain area, but the Cardiff area, I didn't understand their special plan. What is that? What were they asking for there? Could you explain that to me? Sorry.
Yeah, so the Cardiff by the Sea specific plan, the amendment is proposed to remove the habitation unit use out of the zoning matrix table. And so that would be consistent with the other
Okay.
amendments we're making in Title 30.
Thank you. Also, being a resident of Leucadia and driving up and down La Costa Avenue, I would ask you to put Sea Bluff into the count for Leucadia because they are going to be using that road, and it's one of my favorite ways to get around. So if they're going to be leasing that area, it needs to be counted on our road usage. And I think they should be counted as part of the short-term rental. I'd also ask you to please keep the requirement to ask permission of the neighbors that they are leasing the units, that we are notified and given an opportunity to either agree with or not agree with them leasing out their property. And I'm not sure why they changed it to a 3-year permit. The 1 year seems so much better to me, but I would urge you to reconsider that also and to try to keep it a 1-year permitting license or whatever it's called. The other thing, in Leucadia, we have a lot of hotels. And that's a lot of short-term rentals. And you know they just reduced that 101 to 1 lane. And so I would really like you to consider those occupancies as short-term rentals for the Leucadia community. So I hope somebody's taking notes and that you guys are going to implement that. Thank you so much for being here and hearing my concerns. And it's mostly about traffic, as you can see, because I'm the one who gets in and out of that place and worse every year. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Dolores? No comment? Sorry about that. Our question and answer session felt more like deliberation. But, so I'm going to close public comment right now, and I'm going to go to commission deliberation on this. And I'll accept, so Chris, I see you were
I'll
lit up.
start. So I do agree with the first speaker that I do think that the 59 units in Sea Bluff should be incorporated into the 5% for the communities west of the 5. I understand that they have their own rules regarding potentially their number and also how close they can be and their anything else. But I do think that when we're talking about the impact to the coastal communities of having 2% more for the short-term rentals, I do think it'd be appropriate to include the 59 Sea Bluff units into that 5%.
I agree.
I'm just doing some quick math here, and I think 3%
I
or
have
5%? 5%.
another
we're the-
question about the enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Since this came up as a result of community complaints, and their main complaint was seeming to be lack of enforcement and a lack of a cap, it seems like it's kind of the solution should be addressing both issues. Capping it is a great start, but what about the enforcement?
Mm-hmm.
Is that within this resolution? Or do we need something additional after this? I mean, I think capping is a great start.
Yeah, I thought the enforcement section was weak. I'm not really sure what we can put in place, since this does fall into code enforcement, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can answer and respond to that question, or comment rather. So the chapter 9.38 includes all of the city's permit regulations and operating requirements for short-term rentals. And this includes, they have to be compliant with noise, parking, cleaning up their trash and refuse. So part of the ordinance adoption that the city council did in 2021 was to beef up the city's permit regulations and enforcement actions in chapter 9.38.
Because, yeah, it's the weakness to this whole process is that, we make rules, but we don't put any enforcement effort in place, and therefore, it's the wild, wild west. And I'm just trying to, yeah, it's a little, the enforcement section doesn't really have any teeth.
Are there any penalties or monitoring? Is
Yeah,
that
I'm
something that
uncertain
this-
what they are. Melinda, they refer to, the fine amounts that might be set in Government Code Section 36900D or other methods allowed in Chapter 1.08. In the future, I'd prefer to see those things referenced in our staff report, so we don't need to go digging. I'm looking this up on my phone as we go.
Sure. So I do want to point out under the special regulations section, I do have that up on the screen. All short-term rentals are subject to the regulations provided in chapter 9.38. And so the enforcement aspect of having this code section incorporated into the land use elements, it's essentially just tying back to the language that's in 9.38. The fine amounts that are set forth in the government code section start at $1,500 and increase to, I believe, $2,000 and then $3,000. So it starts with the lower amount and then it increases if we don't gain compliance. And that is something that the state law implemented a higher fee amount last year.
Well, I'm okay with that. I think, bearing in mind that this is a recommendation to city council, we could approve this ordinance if we like what's here with any modifications, but it goes there not just like this one piece of paper. It can go with our recommendations, which can be, we love it, but the enforcement is the big hole in the project. You know, people will do bad things, and as long as nobody's enforcing it or they're not enforcing it vigorously, then, you know, we're wasting our time. And council can at that point direct city manager to do some more about that. And I think should be part of our recommendation to council, not just the ordinance as proposed, but our comments on it.
That's correct. You can make additional recommendations for their consideration, for future consideration. What I would recommend, though, in regards to enforcement, are you specifically just providing more clarification that we could then, if you put that as part of your motion, provide to city council? So is it the fact that in most cases, enforcement is based on complaint? It's not a proactive. This is the only, I'm pretty sure it's the only one that we proactively enforce through code enforcement using a contract services to help us find these. So that's why I'm asking if you could provide more direction on what you think enforcement would include.
Gotcha. Thank you for that clarification too, because this is,
Well, I really,
yeah, go.
sorry. I really think that in general, short-term rental should comply with all current code requirements in terms of noise or excessive parking or, you know, all of, it should comply with whatever we already have. But the problem seems to be for people that if they call with a complaint, that no one comes to say, you know, you move the car or stop the music or whatever it is, you know, that they're complaining about. So I'm not really sure if we need somebody dedicated to do that. If the city needs to hire staff to do that, I don't know. How do we get that enforcement to actually happen when a complaint occurs?
I can create some clarity here on what I'm after. So we have two issues here. One is you're having loud parties, people are calling and saying, you know, enforce this code. That's one level of enforcement, and code enforcement does that or doesn't that. They hopefully are doing a good job. We've now created a new parameter here, which is there can't be more than X units. So now when units crop up, we need a different kind of enforcement that is more reactive. Because, you know, as I pointed out earlier this evening, we're going to have SB 9 lot split people who have decided to rent out their ADU for the weekend, and they can't. It's not allowed. And maybe they do it all the time, and I'm not sure if, host compliance would catch them. But right now, we've created, with the first ordinance we created, there's places where you literally cannot rent that thing. And so we're not sending them out a letter saying, hey, make sure you apply so we can get your TOT taxes. We're saying, you can't do that anymore. And, you know, I think we're probably within 200 units west of 5 right now. If we do incorporate the C Bluff into the count, it's not going to be long. It's really nice here, and people want to rent their places, and it's, you know, those non-hosted STRs are going to get snapped up, and then, you know, it's going to be waiting for someone to either sell their house and take them off the list because they can't transfer the license. But we'll be there. We're not there now, but it's not as far away as it was originally presented when I saw it presented to council.
Right, but Kevin, if we include the 59 units from Sea Bluff, that affects the 5% cap for those communities west of the freeway, but it does that means that instead of those units being in those coastal communities, then they could then be in other parts of Encinitas. So you still have the same 3% cap over the entire city. So I think it's important to incorporate those units into the 5% in order to spread out the concentrations of the short-term rentals away from the coastal communities, Leucadia in particular, that has a very significant traffic problem, and spread it out and encourage people to create short-term rentals in other parts of the city that still can have coastal access. You can be west of the freeway and still have coastal access.
But, the enforcement's going to be really critical. I mean, in Leucadia, as you point out, if we include those 59 units, we're at 149 units. And I think we can only take, what is it? Not very many. I'm trying to do all the math on the fly as I'm going here. But
Well, it looks like we could have
42, 26 units.
137 minus 59, I think is what it would be, is the additional units in Leucadia that would be allowed. So if you go to page 4 of 16, and you go to the Leucadia, currently 149 non-hosted, and then with the 5%, and a change of 137 would be allowed. So it'd be
So
the
now we're-
137 minus the 59. So there still is room for additional short-term rentals in the Leucadia area.
But I mean, how many units total? So we have 4,226 times 5%. 211 units. And we've got 149 plus if we include the Sea Bluff properties.
The 211 would be with a 5% cap.
So we're really close. Isn't the cap? Yeah, the cap's 211 units. Yeah, we're doing our job. We get to the right thing. It's a little long-winded, and thank you both for sitting here and listening to us jabber away, but we're planning nerds. My concern is with the cap is, Leucadia is also home to many, many large lots that, people, will want to take advantage of that. So we're going to hit a point within, say 3 years where Leucadia is maxed out. No more non-hosted short-term rentals, which sounds good, but I mean, also we have to think about people who that's their livelihood. What happens if they lose their license for whatever reason? Mostly I'm looking out for the people who live here, or I'm trying to.
But that's making the assumption that those short-term rental units are owned by people that live in the community versus being owned by
True. And we're only dealing with
corporation or people that
non-hosted.
have absentee owners that have a vacation house here too that also
Rent it out.
rent it out the rest of the time, or owned by a company, corporation, or trust.
Right.
Which my experience along Neptune and friends that I've had that have rented houses and my family that have rented houses even along Neptune, I do know that a lot of them are at least managed by corporations, and I don't think very many of them are locally controlled.
It's also the non-hosted. We talked about people who are going away for 3 weeks and renting their house out as an Airbnb while they're gone, which turns it into a new non-hosted development. I'm imagining most people will just do it and not think anything of it, not file any permits, not pay any TOT, and host compliance will either catch that or not catch that. And if they do catch that, what do we have in place? What do we do to them? Do they get fined $1,500 or what happens?
So with code enforcement, we are required to provide the applicant with due process to come into compliance if they can. So that starts off with a courtesy notice. If we don't get any response from that, then code enforcement can initiate a case and increase their code enforcement capabilities, which would involve going to like a notice of violation and citations.
Okay, but I mean, as soon as we get another, 59 units, then we're maxed out in Leucadia, for instance, which is already very close. So that
But
case,
I
any
think I'm
new-
okay with that.
any new.
I'm
but
okay
no,
with it being
but
maxed
it's-
out,
I'm
though.
still getting back to enforcement. At that point, any new non-hosted unit, you go away for 3 weeks and rent your house out through Airbnb, you're now in violation, and there's no coming into compliance because there's no more permits.
So I think those are one-offs because it's very expensive to rent. If you have a home and you want to rent it on Airbnb, you pay significant cost to Airbnb or VRBO. So those are, I don't know that a person would, if they were going away just for 3 weeks, they would go through the process of renting out their house through one of those.
Suppose they're going away for 6 weeks and they have somebody manage it for
Then
them.
if that's
And
the
they're out.
case, then they should register their STR in advance and get a permit. If they think they're going to be traveling 6 months out of the year, then they should get an STR and they should register and take one of the 59. At that point, we've maxed out. Sorry, Charlie, you're late to the
Yeah.
game. We
So
can't
I'm
be
looking ahead
unlimited for
3
every
to 5
person.
years. We already are maxed out.
Right.
At this point, and, somebody, without thinking on it, just says, I'm going to do this.
Well, I
And
guess-
at that point, what enforcement,
Well, there should be some.
what penalties would they incur if they were now a disallowed Airbnbs? Is there anything in section 108 or 39.6?
D,
Can't remember the details.
3900D.
Yeah. I mean, what penalties are they liable to at that point?
So if they're a continued violator of not coming into compliance with the city's regulations, then code enforcement has the ability to continue to increase the fines that they have to pay. So because of the amount, I believe code enforcement supervisor has told me that those fines are getting the applicants to come in and apply for permits because it is a high amount.
Okay.
So in essence, if you're number 2, we've maxed out, and you're the next person in the door. You're not subject to an additional punitive. You're just in violation of the original code. You're not like, oh, you're numbered 601, you have to pay A plus B. You're just having to pay the same violation as somebody who didn't register. There's no additional, I'm sure we could say, well, if you're outside, we've hit the cap and you're the next person in, you could say, we could establish a recommendation to the city council to change the code and say, well, that's an immediate $1,000 fine.
Yeah, they could do that, because, we will hit a point,
Yeah.
and Leucadia is very close to the wire, and the other coastal communities will get there. So I'm trying to think, looking at this
Beyond it.
ordinance, I'm trying to think past the point where we're 5% all the way across the board. And now, there's going to be anyone who has a new short-term rental is a violator.
Yeah.
And I would like council to
A
have that on their
two-tiered-
radar.
A two-tiered fees, a two-tiered penalty. You're number 601, so boom, that's $500, and you violated 3 different times. That's 500, whatever the code is, $500 each. So you're getting the additional punitive because you are outside. We have to protect our communities and the people that live in these communities. We've done that by trying to establish a cap, a distance radius, which I'll get to in a second. But that's what we're doing here. So the reality is, yeah, we're going to hit the cap. We could hit the cap tomorrow.
And then what happens? That's what I'm
That's
trying
your
to get at.
question, and I don't think there's an answer other than they are in violation. There's
Right.
not an additional
And,
tier.
We could either wait until that happens and then let council, or commission at the time deal with it, or we could try and get ahead of it now. Because I see it's not something that's going to happen in the far, far future. It looks so great at first when I saw council. It was like, oh, it's almost 500 more units, plenty of units for everybody. Whereas it's not really. We're closer to the limit citywide and also in the coastal zone. So I'm thinking, before, 3 years from now, I'm going to guess we're going to be at the cap, probably in Leucadia, almost certainly, we're the closest, especially if we add Sea Bluff to the count, which I agree with. I think that's.
Yeah, the rentals.
I know I listened to council, and council was pretty clear on their take on this, so they may overrule us.
Then lower the cap.
Yeah.
Look, the net is they're rentals.
Yeah.
Any way, shape, or form, they're rentals. They're using the roads and the services just as any other rental would be. It just happens to be in the Sea Bluff community. Well,
Yeah.
net, it's a rental. So
Yeah, I want neighbors. I don't like the concept of non-hosted rentals. I like a small amount of them when I travel, but I don't want to find myself living in a
Entire town
neighborhood
of them.
that's nothing but short-term rentals. I'll
Right.
be like, what the hell, man? I travel all this way and I'm not getting the vibe of where I'm at.
Exactly.
So Kevin, I'd like to add to this. I think, first of all, I want to compliment staff for the data-driven solution that they hammered out. And I think that the data really does speak to us. I think that each community should have their own cap. I don't think it's right if one community is suddenly super heavy and the other is lighter. I don't think it's fair unless each community has its own cap. That would be my recommendation personally. I think also that the focus on owner-occupied was very strategic and very good. When the owner's not there, it's a whole different ballgame. Because owners really care about their property and they will be taking care and to keep an eye on everything. And I think that the vast majority of your data shows that we have a lot of non-hosted, non-owner hosted. So I'm glad that you focused there. I think that this speaks a lot to the affordability of our city as a whole, and that the cap is extremely necessary, and the sooner you do it, the better. But it should be applied even-handedly, in my opinion. And I think that the affordability, it becomes an issue if we have too many of these short-term rentals.
So I want to speak again to code enforcement, because I think I have a different take on the code enforcement. I think that a person who doesn't permit isn't going first to the city to find out if their area is already maxed. I think they're just renting their place. So I don't think that, I think that I'm not as worried as you are, Kevin, about your particular, what you see. I think that these people, if they want to rent it, they're just going to rent it, and it doesn't matter which of these communities they're in. They won't go through the effort to find out if they can permit it legally.
We don't know what the lag time is for host compliance. It could be by the time we find out about it so far in the past, it's not even findable.
Yes, and there will be people who fall out of this too, right? If we have the 3-year permit, but it can be revoked if they don't, for inaction within a 12-month consecutive period, you will have units that fall out of being permitted, and then we'll have people who decide they don't want to get re-permitted. So there's going to be ebb and flow all the time too. And we don't know what that, we don't have the data here as to how many units are re-permitted per year, what percentage or what aren't. I actually do like the 3-year, because I do think probably the re-permitting for all of these units each year is a really big burden on staff, I would think. So I think that the 3 years with the 12-month consecutive, kind of the washout, would be a good solution.
On the 3 years, is it, let's just say for discussion purposes, is it $100 a year? So now it's a 3-year permit, is it $300? I mean, I'd hate to have a revenue model be adjusted downward in these times by allowing a 3-year permit for the same price as a 1-year permit.
So the city council did increase the permit application fees, and they are paid annually right now. So it's at $425, and that was an increase from $120 that it was initially. But the city council didn't necessarily have a concern with increasing the renewal to 3 years in relation to the permit fee revenue. And we're already subsidizing the staff time to do the review, because we're not collecting 100% fee capture, we're doing it 80%.
So it would be a 3-year permit with dues collected annually?
No, they would just pay the fee again upon the renewal at the 3 years. And they are also paying their TOT quarterly. That may increase to being monthly. So part of what we're also working on is to get a TOT collection portal, but that's not part of the ordinance tonight.
And the TOT tax, is that 10% or so? What is that?
It's 10%.
It is 10? And that's pretty much dwarfs the payments usually made for the permit costs.
That's correct.
I think that's, the TOT taxes, we're not, Carlsbad, I know, has a vast majority of their income comes from TOT, whereas we're more property taxes, actually, I think our biggest income generator. And that's because we are a residential community. You know, we're not necessarily a hotel, but I think there are a lot of things I really like about this. I think there will be people, they'll sell their houses and the permits aren't transferable. So one by one, the legal non-conforming units, it might take a long time, but they'll change hands and they'll have to be, as time goes by, all of these STRs will be kind of scattered out 200 feet apart. Now, if we, concerning the sea bluff, if we want to include that in the count, we kind of have to still have them not applicable to all the other regulations because they're all too close to each other. There's the 200-foot rule is not going to work. And I think council's intent was that that would remain as it is. But I agree. Can we alter this so that we actually, or our recommendation would be that we include this number in the overall count, especially on the west of the 5 count, and possibly in the citywide?
Yeah.
Is it counted in the citywide, by the way?
It was counted in the citywide.
Okay. So concerning the west of the 5 number, we don't agree with, I think, do we have consensus that we don't agree with removing that from the count?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I mean, it could be that as those change hands, they change their status to have to become 200 feet apart as much as possible.
well, but
You know, we could have something
you have to,
that
have you,
affects
I don't
how
know if-
that works out.
I don't know if you've driven through there, but that's not possible.
Yeah.
You know, you got to be careful. You open your window and you stick your head out, you might bump into the house next door. I'm exaggerating, but it's a tight community. I think the intent has always been, at least I watched council's meeting again just this morning, and their intent was Sea Bluff would somehow remain
I
as
hear
it is.
you, I hear you. I think, you know, maybe that Sea Bluff could be excluded from the 200-foot requirement then,
Yeah.
something
It's-
like that. But something should be said about it so that it's codified.
I think the main thing here is where we would like to see it added to the count was when we're looking at the percentage in the different communities, Cardiff, Leucadia, and Old Encinitas, coastal communities.
Right.
So removing it there makes it look like they're all on par with each other, and they are not.
Right.
I mean, Sea Bluff, kind of its own little thing, it's hidden away, but it's a lot of houses up there. It's a lot of units, and I'm going to guess that they're probably one of the estimated residential units west of the 5 in Leucadia. So we counted them as units. We should count them as STRs.
Yep.
You know, we'll give them a pass because council seems to want it on these other regulations concerning the density there. But in terms of the total number of units allowed in Leucadia, Old Encinitas, Cardiff, I don't want to see any cutouts like this.
Agree.
So, Melinda, is this something you could incorporate easily, or is this something we would need, if we want to make this change, would this need to come back to us?
I do have a
Where we
track
can change
change
this.
on the screen. I just highlighted it for you
Okay.
all. So essentially, all I did was add a period after the subsections A and B shall not apply to hosted units, and then started a new sentence that the provisions of subsection B, which is the location and distance requirements, shall not apply to short-term rentals located within the residential neighborhood known as Sea Bluff.
Okay, and B is the 200-foot radius.
That's correct.
What's just a little low? Can you scroll down so we can see? Yeah,
Can you share your screen with us?
Yeah, it is. Oh, that's her, this is me. She has it, she just.
oh, I
she
think
just scrolled.
there's a button on that box, presentation. We'll show that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
you were
constantly
there. I was trying to figure it out.
scrolling back and forth.
Kevin, I have a couple more questions. On special regulations B, number 2, non-hosted short-term rentals located east of interstate not be subject to the distance requirement. Why not?
That's a good question. Those short-term rentals that are currently in that area aren't really impacted and overlapped with each other, but certainly if the Planning Commission wanted to make a recommendation to also include those, then we could look at that.
I'd be in favor of that. There's no reason why they have to be any exceptions, why make exceptions to the rules? That's my opinion. I don't understand why it can be a limitation in one place but not in the other part of the city unless there's some quantitative reason why. So that would affect Old Encinitas and all the other communities. I understand that the demand drivers for the coastal commission, the coastal side, I get that, but I don't know why there'd be an exception.
Can you rephrase your point? Because I'm trying to figure out what we're,
All right, so under location, which is B, number 2, non-hosted short-term rental units located east of Interstate 8 shall not be subject to a distance requirement. And my question is, why not? Why not have a 200-foot barrier? I don't understand why.
Because they're non-hosted, is different from hosted.
well, non-hosted
that
and
why?
hosted are very different.
Number 1, B, is non-hosted short-term rentals west of Logan shall maintain a 200-foot radius. Okay.
Yeah, I totally, Robert, that's a great point, because, you know, it's called out here because it's not a problem now. But will it be a problem 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? Things we put in place now will stick around
That's
long
right.
after we're.
So
moved on.
I recommend delete, I would like to recommend to the commissioners and staff
Strike
to
point
strike
2?
that.
I would support that.
I'm in agreement. Does anyone else, do we have consensus on this? Cool.
Another question was, just in general, it looks like the growth, we went from 1.27% to 3% for the city, and we've gone from, I guess, 2% to 2.4% to 5%. So we're in essence doubling the west of the freeway, and we're tripling the city numbers from 1.27 to 3%, and we've gone from 2.47 to 5. Is that right? Based on the chart?
Yeah, I must need to see numbers in front of me.
I know, that's, all right, let me rephrase that. Staff, could you bring up the section where you talked about in your report where we're increasing from what we are now to what we will be in the future? Thank you. Okay, so I looked at this page and said that we were at 1.27 now, and we're going to 3. So that's roughly a 2.5x increase. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and then there's another table on the west side that says, Old Encinitas, maybe it was here, non-hosted is 2.3, and we're going to 5, correct? Because this is the column that says west of community data, right? And these communities are west of the 5, and we're saying we're going from 2.3 to 5. Is that right?
Correct, that's what's proposed.
Okay, so generally, my question, whether we include, let's see, Bluff is a different calc. Where did these numbers, where did the 5 and the 3 come from?
So as I, excuse me, had mentioned in the presentation, so when we initially presented the short-term rental data-driven analysis, it had incorporated the hosted and non-hosted combined unit information. And at that time, the citywide cap was a lot closer to the 3%, whereas the community cap was also really close to the 5%. It was about 4.3 at the time when the combined hosted and non-hosted information was presented to council.
So I'm mistaken in that it's not doubling or tripling, we're almost there now, to Commissioner Doyle's point. If we're at 4.9 and we're going to 5, we're almost there.
So going back to what Melinda was just saying, so previously we did not have data separating hosted from non-hosted. So the data that was presented had greater numbers. What we're presenting to you is the percentages that were presented to City Council when we collected the new data on hosted, non-hosted, and are presenting you that updated data that was presented to council. There is a greater, let's call it a gap or ability to change based on the fact that there are a certain percentage that were actually hosted units that were included in our previous numbers. If the Planning Commission wants to recommend a different number, you can do so. That is not, the recommendation is to allow a change, though still to occur. If we do not allow growth, this ordinance will not be allowed by Coastal Commission. I can tell you that right now. They are regulating, so City of San Diego got their short-term rentals approved. They had set a cap for, I think, Ocean Beach and Mission Beach, but with a lot of evidence, and that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that we are data-driven in our percentage recommendations as well, so that we are allowing growth to still occur. This number is not set in stone. I do want to make sure I say that. It is going to be based on our annual residential count. So right now, this is what our residential count. So as the community of Leucadia grows, their number of STRs will grow as well. So this is not a set in stone number of only 137 or 78 if you add Sea Bluff, 78 units. That's this year. That could change next year, depending on the number of units that are created in the community. So I do want to make sure I
Because it's a percentage.
state that.
Correct, so
yes.
it's a percentage that's going to be recalculated every year. So Kevin's concerned about it growing, it can grow because we're fixing the percentage. What I'm hearing for the first time, though, is I understand the data-driven analysis, but the 5%, was that encouraged, was that suggested by Coastal Commission? Is there a situation where Coastal Commission's going to say, I want you to have 7%? Are you getting the impression in your conversation with Coastal Commission, because they're a state agency, then that's going to really trump our ability to put a cap at 5?
They do trump our ability to put
I
a
understand.
cap, but we're recommended 5% when we were looking at these numbers and the percent of non-hosted in our west of the I-5 communities. When we initially did the numbers that included both hosted and non-hosted, the percent that you see here that says like 2.6%, that was like 4% previously. And so that's how we initially had stated 5%, because it still allowed a little bit of growth within these communities. So if, now that you see new numbers, if Planning Commission wants to make a recommendation that still allows growth, you can do so. So if you want to set it at 4%, you can do so tonight.
Thank you. So my question back to the commissioners is, do we want to accept a 3 and 5% as presented? Seems like they were kind of ballparked. So yeah, there's a lot in our control here to protect our communities, still allow for the flexibility of short-term rentals, still allow for some growth, but the number as presented is really a number, a ballpark we can adjust, and that's the first time I've heard that.
So maybe somebody who's fast with math, I don't know who that is, what if we set it at 4%, just to run the numbers, like 4% for the communities west of the 5, add in Sea Bluff, and figure out how many additional units would be left?
Because we're already at, we add in Sea Bluff, Leucadia's at 3.5%.
So we'd be at 3.5%.
Sorry, thank you very much.
And I'm okay with that, too. I'm okay with already being at 3.5%, and, I mean, 3.5 to 4 is growth.
Yeah, is that now, in staff's opinion, will Coastal Commission see that as sufficient growth, or will they balance it with the other communities that have plenty of growth?
I would never want to.
Oh, yeah, guess
state.
what Coastal's going to do?
No.
Okay, that's fair enough. Well, I would say So now 4%, if we were to recommend 4% for coastal, would we want to drop to like 2.5 for citywide, given the amount of non-hosted versus hosted? Because really, we don't want people to not be able to rent their spaces. We just want people to not buy a house, rent it out, and then never return. We like our neighbors who want to live there and rent out their spare room or whatever they've got attached to their house.
Right, and I'm trying to think about the people that are existing, that live in the community, whose kids live in the community versus people coming in for the weekends. And I have read of situations in other communities in San Diego along the coastal where it's less of a community because of the rentals. And there's people who live here, people that work here, and they've committed to the community. I understand there's people there are businesses who rent these houses, whether it's a corporation or individual. Just think at some point we reach a limit where our community flavor is lost. And that is my concern. There will be growth. Where Malaya is going to be expanded. There'll be other communities along the 101 from Captain Keno's down. The communities will be growing. The natural growth of the communities as the percentage will allow additional growth, whether it's the calc every year and there's 24 new permits advised, opens up, so there is room for growth. It's not fixed. I think at some point we probably just need to see, I would like to suggest that they come back and show us a table with a range of percentages so that we can look quantifiably at the number of units per community at 4% or 4.5%, and now we've seen it at 5%. So to me, it's a simple table with some adjustments so that we can maybe make an informed decision on the impact.
I think the complaints are an indicator to us that there already is a problem at the current level. So I'm thinking that the cap of 5% is plenty. It may be too much. But at the same time, whatever number we decide, I think there will be an awful lot of hosted and unpermitted going on. So, I mean, in some ways, I think you're right, we need to come down a little bit on that percent. It won't hurt a thing.
Could we say in consensus, we think the 5% in the coastal region is too high and it should be reduced to 4%?
I believe so, but I also will defer to my neighbors who live in those coastal communities who deal with it a
Oh,
little
yeah,
bit
that's
more.
right. I forgot, you lived inland.
Yes.
It does.
But, no, it sounds perfectly reasonable. I mean, I'm used to thinking about, all the different areas here. Levenheim is different. But, citywide now, 3%, which I think was $797, did I remember? Or $798? Is that a reasonable number? And is this?
At the end of the day, I guess we're looking at the definition of
Well, what do we
reasonableness.
have?
Right.
I mean,
And I think we need to think about the additional housing units that are going to be built in our communities within the next 5 years with, even in Leucadia alone, not just the Maria, but also the new complex at Vulcan
Right.
in La Costa, and then also the new subdivision at La Costa by the gas station. So those are just new units coming on in the next couple of years that, with each new one, it gets calculated into the percentage. So I'd be comfortable with the 4%. And I think it will allow for growth and growth over time.
Support that, and there's always going to be a fudge factor of people not complying, and there's going to be some of that, so that has to be considered. And look, if the number at the end of the next year is not enough, then I'm sure the public and the city council will make some recommendations.
I think those recommendations based on non-hosted, short-term, are the most critical because they are the majority of the short-term rentals, and they don't have an owner present. So it's a completely different thing in my mind than if the owner is present. And so you have like owner-hosted short-term rental. But this ordinance is primarily the coastal western part of the city and the non-hosted rentals. So I think it's good and appropriate, 3%.
Is everybody comfortable with the 3%, or do we want to talk about changing the 3% as well?
Yeah, I'm just, want to discuss it. I'm just doing some math. So it's 798 at 3%. What is it, 26,597 times, say we had 2.5%, then it would be 664.
Which
Now-
is just the number today,
Which,
in this moment.
and this 339, that's how many non-hosted that this study turned up. So we really are at 1.27 right now. So going up to 3 is allowing, a healthy buffer, more than we already have now. I don't think that's what our intent. I think, dropping that down to even 2%, 2.5 to 2, I would say. It's, if 339 is all we have, at 2.5%, that's 664 units. It's,
You're almost doubling. I
yeah,
mean,
it's
that's-
almost exactly doubling
lot.
at that point, 1.27 to 2.5.
Yeah, that's
I mean, I think,
100% increase.
yeah, so I would be very comfortable with recommending we lower that. I mean, council may not agree, but, that's their prerogative.
Yep.
They want our recommendation. The data they presented was old data, it did not have the non-hosted carved out. So now we're looking at it and it's like, whoa, that's a lot.
Right. I agree.
So, it could be, we want it to be 2%. 2% would be, 510 units, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and that's a 80% increase. Those are some big percentages and some big numbers.
I think long before the city is maxed out, we leave it at 2.5 and it wouldn't be an issue because the 4% in the coastal region is the one that's going to get packed up first. And some number of years from now, when we're all termed out and no longer serving on the commission, we'll hit that number and then the city will have new problems to deal with. It's like, what do we do? People keep trying to break the rules. But our goal here is to set up good rules. And so, but I'm afraid if we go down to 2%, we're going to say, oh, you guys are overreach, we've gone too far, and they'll shoot us down. So because it doesn't really matter, because I don't think it's the 4% is what's going to be the real killer, that's why I would say 2.5% would be a good recommendation. It might actually be confirmed by council.
I support that. That'd be good.
I would support that, too.
Making notes, I got 4 different changes proposed here.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, it's like usually, because usually it's like, I'd like to make a motion. What would you like it to say? It's like, oh, God, I don't remember.
I do have one more
Going to go
question.
down to 3% or?
2.5%. We want the 3% citywide to be knocked down to 2.5%. And the main reason being that right now, our citywide non-hosted is only at 1.27%. So we're allowing it to double. And the numbers all seemed reasonable when council first saw it because it was old data.
Right.
This new study has now carved out the non-hosted, which is the ones we're really concerned about. Not concerned about my neighbors renting out their shed for somebody to come and stay for
Right.
a couple of weeks or a couple of days. I don't care. They're my neighbors. If they make trouble, I'll call. Probably won't, but I could call code enforcement.
Code enforcement.
And that came up, and you guys mentioned before, I mean, I've always loved this about Encinitas. We are a reactive, our code enforcement department is reactive. They don't go driving around and say, whoa, your trash cans aren't hidden away properly. They wait until someone complains. And for the most part, that makes a kind of a good neighbor policy.
Right.
And this is the only one that you mentioned that we actually are proactive. We are hunting them down. And the thing I'm most happy about is that we actually have host compliance. We have this thing that lets us do this because I remember talking to someone about this 5 years ago. Was Royce Apau, and he was like,
Yeah.
he wasn't sure. The tech wasn't really there. So I don't know how long we've been using this thing, but I don't know how long I've been around. But I'm glad it's here. And the fact that we can enforce it means that when it becomes a problem and we've got the regulations in place, it will be enforced.
I have one last question on the enforcement on the parking. So when Commissioner Doyle's family shows up next door with his family at my house, in my neighborhood, how do you handle the parking enforcement if there's 5 different families showing up?
So the permit operators are supposed to disclose how many vehicles can be parked at the short-term rental. And so if the number of vehicles do exceed and they're being parked on the public street, they are subject to code enforcement.
Okay.
So that is a disclosure that we are requiring the short-term rental operators to provide to whoever's going to be renting their unit.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of tough because if you're on Neptune, someone could be surfing that day. It's really not hard to know that if there's 5 families in the house on Neptune, if they just happen to be showing up because there's good waves, right?
Yeah.
So it's really hard in some locations of these beach communities, who's a beach day tripper versus somebody who's doing an overnight rental, right? We don't have little hangy down things on the windows or anything like that, right? So it's kind of tough. Okay. Thank you.
I'm looking at what's on the screen right now. The first sentence we added about the provisions of subsection B not applying to Sea Bluff. Kind of once you crossed out west of Interstate 5 in B1. Oh, no, we've got the existing legal non-hosted. You did exactly the right thing, I think. Or...
Because we took out the reference for east of Interstate 5, felt it was prudent to also
We don't
remove the
need
reference
west of it
west of
either.
Interstate 5. 'Cause it
Okay,
applies to
cool.
both.
I get you. I see what's happened. Thank you. Just, it's hard when you're just seeing a little piece of it. And you've been making all the changes as we go. I love you. Thank you. Do we have any other concerns or issues with this?
No matter what we decide,
We're making
still has to go to
recommendations to
council.
council. And council may say, yeah.
they may change
Or
it
they
again.
may say, wow, you didn't go far enough. At this point, we really don't know. Our job is to analyze it and give them our best take on because we want the right things to be done. We seem to be running out of steam comment-wise. I'd be willing to, I'll even attempt the motion, so I've got it all written out here. I'm going to make a motion that we approve this newly proposed ordinance, or at least this recommendation as you've modified as we went, and it's incorporating the fact that we want to make sure that the hosted Leucadia account, where we've removed the Sea Bluff properties from the total STR account, we want to make sure that that is included. I see you've already included the set modification where we're eliminating the 200, we're making the east of 5 liable to the 200-foot distance. We find, based on the new data, that the 5% in the coastal region is just too high. We're recommending 4%, which would still give a significant buffer for every community with the exception of Leucadia. And citywide, we have a 3% is almost a 275% increase. We think 2.5% would allow for citywide STRs to double, and we consider that to be a good compromise. We feel we're very pleased that the non-hosted numbers have been broken out, which has allowed us to come to these conclusions. And did I miss any other recommendations? You know, you've been changing them as we go. If not, that is my motion.
I'd like to second the motion.
Thank you. Commissioner Prendergast. Seconds. Do we have any further discussion on this? let's look at a vote. Dina, call the question. I'm not sure where I'm seeing.
I'm working on it.
You did the same thing that I did.
Oh, there we go.
I s- We, Susan, I don't think yours is, switch, yeah. Switch to the agenda voting button, on the one on the top. Yeah, I know. There was a lag. I did the same thing. I switched away from it.
Oh, why'd it go away?
I'm waiting. I don't see that vote showing up yet. Try,
I tried to touch it and I tried to click it, but it didn't seem to go.
oh, I was gonna, no. Can we, Dina, can we adjust that
It
manually?
shows, yeah, it shows on here. I don't know why it's not reflecting up there. But the vote passes unanimously with,
Unanimously with
with-
4-0 with Commissioner Dalton absent.
correct.
What a mess I've made of all my papers. I don't need to gavel this one out, do I? I'll do it anyway. Thank you, everyone. That was hard work. This is the most important work I think we do, which is, we don't create policy ourselves, but we have a part in this situation here. So I hope you two ladies will join us. I'll probably be, I don't know if I'll come to council, but I'm going to be watching this one really closely. And I'm going to declare this item done, and I'm going to move on. Do we have any future items added by planning commissioners? You don't have to. Say again? We'll do our best. That's on every agenda. That's item 13. It's not always on the page.
I had a question about the road from Elfin Forest coming through. Yeah, someone commented, I don't know if that's a planned agenda item, but maybe I'll go for discussion purpose. It wasn't traffic, it was road was paved, there's now ingress and egress through city property.
Oh, yeah.
And did the city approve it or not?
I read about this. There's a private road that's like links up at Elfin Forest.
Correct.
And we're assuming that in a fire, they're going to open those gates and people are going to be pouring into a Liebenhain, or I don't know.
There's no gate.
Okay.
So they've paved
So there's a new shortcut.
They've paved on city roads and city of influence, and I didn't know if that was permitted, what the city's going to do about it, what the city can do about it. Be happy to pull it up on the map and show people where it is. I just didn't know if that was now or later.
Is that something staff could help address?
I can coordinate with our traffic department to look into that and possibly code enforcement to see if there's anything that we can look into. Yep,
Okay, thank you.
sure.
Cool. Well, that's great. Doesn't have to be put in. Just for future reference, I've created when I was 6 months into this, I created an agenda item, and I found that if just one planning commissioner creates this agenda item, it's that planning commissioner writes the staff report. So, and I think that if you can get a couple of planning commissioners together, then you can dump it off on staff. But it's a big task creating a staff report. It's a big task. And thank you, ladies, and thank you, Anna. It's like, I know you guys all came up through the ranks, and this is it's a big deal. So don't take it lightly, because you got to come up with a good report. You got to make us look good.
Okay. I don't know if that wants to be number 9. Maybe it's just the conversation, but I'll take any direction from the chair and from staff on how to address the concern.
Well, I think having staff look into this with the Traffic and Mobility Commission, or the Abe Bannigan, seems to be everything falls on him.
Thank you.
Everyone keeps a great list of the things he does wrong. I don't know if anyone tracks what he does right, but I mean, he's a very He's a hard worker and a smart guy. So I suspect that will get looked into more deeply. Do we have any planning commissioner reports? Anything?
The ECR task force will be meeting at Starbucks on El Camino Real. We're going to do a walkabout on El Camino Real for the El Camino Real corridor specific plan from 9 a.m. to 11, Saturday, October 8th.
Which is like 2 days from now. I'm unfortunately going to miss that. I'm working as a poll worker again this year, so I'll be running the poll voting location at the Encinitas Community Center. And so even though I just did it 6 months ago, I'm going to have to go back for my 3-day training, which I start tomorrow morning. And the car I was planning to drive, I blew my motor. My car is dead. My beloved little Miata is now a semi-mobile paperweight as long as you push really hard. So, but I'm going to miss that. I'm really sad because I did the first one of those when we had Eric Burden out here, and it was a real eye-opener walking along that corridor. It's not, pedestrians are not very welcome there. And it's really clear once you walk it once. You're like, holy cow, the driveways are all really long and wide, and you're not welcome there usually.
And I have walked it before too, like dropping my car off for some kind of work and then deciding to walk to a nearby store. And people look at you really strangely when you walk down El Camino Real too.
They're like,
"What are
you
you
don't
doing
look
walking
like
here?"
a worker here. You look so, what the hell? You're obviously casing places. You're a burglar. It's like, I
They
mean.
probably didn't think I was a burglar, Kevin, but.
No. Well, I can remember when I was looking for an apartment here. I stayed in Village Park, and I walked down, and I crossed the El Camino Real, which is like 120 feet wide, and to get to Starbucks, and I got the weirdest looks. Everyone was like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, I don't live here yet. I don't have a car. I don't have several cars. I have no cars. And it's not an easy town to, and this was 20 years ago, but it hasn't really improved as much as I'd hoped. So I'm very much looking forward. Thank you for your efforts with the El Camino Real Task Force, because I think it's super important.
I'll wear bright colors.
Oh, smart. Anna, do we have any secretary reports?
We probably both have planning commission reports because Bob and I both did attend the APA conference
tell us how that went.
And Anna was there too. I did not see Anna, but I know that she was present for the whole thing. Because of my work schedule, I wasn't able to attend the whole thing, but I did attend several sessions. And Steve was there too. Commissioner Dalton was also there. And it was pretty interesting. It was big, a lot much bigger than I expected, and very interesting. Went to a couple of interesting sessions. One was a small town up north that did a presentation on cottages.
Okay.
But their cottages were 750 square feet or greater, which I thought was maybe not necessarily the cottage I had in mind when I was thinking cottages. But they went through their planning process and what they were doing to try to encourage these kind of cottage communities to deal with their housing issues. And I thought that was interesting. I thought maybe in our community we might be more willing to go smaller on a cottage community type of idea, maybe even a tiny home cottage community area in some areas of our community. We have areas off of Hermes already that if you go down the flag lots, it is kind of like a little cottage community already. So I thought that was kind of interesting and could have application here. And then I also went to one that dealt with taking commercial centers, shopping malls that are no longer very viable, and adding in a housing element to them. So turning a section of them into housing, apartments, townhouses. There was a woman who presented from Chula Vista, and she has 2 projects for the city of Chula Vista, and she has 2 projects going down in Chula Vista. And they were going to be mixed-use facilities. They still were going to keep some of the existing retail and then add in the housing into both of those shopping centers as well. And they showed us some renderings. They looked very nice, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, too, if we're looking toward additional housing in our community, looking at some of the strip malls. We don't really have a mall in Encinitas that's like an indoor-type mall, but we do have strip malls. So just forward-thinking into incorporating housing.
And I
If-
think
if space
Gavin
becomes
Newsom
available.
just signed that into law,
Yeah.
didn't he? Like AB 2011
Yeah,
or,
Exactly.
I can't remember which.
It was kind of interesting. I talked to Anna about this during our briefing. I didn't realize that you could have a mall and then a pad could be owned by an individual owner. So you might have somebody who owns the whole mall, but Macy's owns their own land. So there are a lot of, there can be a lot of restrictions. But I thought it was really interesting. I thought it's something that we could think about in the future for Encinitas.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think the El Camino Real project's been looking into that,
Right.
Because there's a lot of space that's kind of wasted. It's like our big box stores aren't big enough,
Right.
but they're big enough for housing, and they got big parking lots out back.
They have a lot of
Out
parking.
front, yeah. So I'm excited about that one. I just hope I haven't really seen the details of the state law. I was hoping we would come up with our own ordinance for this first, because the state law, again, we find ourselves behind the 8 ball. It's like, the state came up with a law, and it's wide open. Doesn't have the nuances that we would put in. So hopefully when that comes, we'll be addressing that, and just as we are addressing all of these ordinances, right? I assume staff is already working on this, Anna? Or at least talking about it? So it's, because, I'm sure you're in the same boat. You probably don't know what's in the law. There's new laws every day.
I went to a couple of different sessions. One of them was just overwhelming. It was like a fire hose. First of all, the amount of state laws being passed, even the people making presentations couldn't remember if it was AB 2234 or 2244 or 2344. And these are the people from HCD, and it was just the amount. It was being presented by an attorney, and he basically went through all the different laws that had passed, and then all the different laws that didn't quite get to a vote, but could come to a vote, that are coming. So a huge amount of respect for our team, our staff that's there to keep up on top of these things. It was overwhelming. These rooms, there were 500 people in this one room, and this one gentleman and woman, 2 attorneys, basically spoke for an hour and a half without breathing, going through all the different laws and all the different layers and how the laws aren't consistent and how they're not applied consistently across the platform. It was compared to what our staff presents to us, I think so many people, there are some towns up there that have 2 people in their planning community, their planning staff trying to deal with all of these different, the phrase that comes to mind is like an unfunded mandate, where you're required to do all these different steps, but there's no funding for you to be able to implement all of these different steps. So when you're a small town and, up in Lake or Pismo Beach area, they can't handle just law after law being passed, and there's just no way to keep track of it all. They have 2 people, and they're just completely overwhelmed. So it kind of felt like, Big Brother was just dumping all over the city, the cities, and it was just amazing that. I also went to a couple of CAL FIRE hosted components about the very high fire safety zones and their impact on planning, evacuations, and climate change. I thought that was pretty applicable for Encinitas. I mean, it wasn't long ago when my horse was at the Del Mar racetrack, and they were saying, you're now going to have to evacuate the track because the track's going to burn down in '07. So, it's not just a Liebenhain, and it's not just New Encinitas, or it's pretty much, look at the fire that was in Carlsbad not too long ago that someone flicked a cigarette at La Costa. Next thing you know, you had an urban fire. So it was interesting to talk about the hardening codes that are in effect, most like the hurricane codes that are in effect in Florida. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I had an interesting banter with a gentleman from HCD regarding housing mandates. I thought that was a fun conversation to have, as he asked me where I was from. I was from Encinitas, and he Encinitas. And I said, yes, I've seen a letter from, he said, Robin. And I said, yes, I've seen a letter from Robin. And he says, for some reason I had forgotten my little tag, so he couldn't see who I was. I didn't realize it. And he was very curious. I'm trying to think, I thought his name was Brian. Maybe it's Brian Heaton, he lives in Ukaipa, but he works for HCD. And I started discussing the financing structures, the mandates for labor considerations. And there were many of the conversations all required union labor. And I thought of Malaya, where the only person who appealed CEQA was the Carpenters Union. And we discussed the financing structures associated with building affordable housing and how labor costs significantly increase the cost of housing, which results in fewer units.
I thought the same thing when I was reading about that.
Yes. So he was somewhat, now he doesn't make the laws, he has to implement the laws.
Right.
But it was an interesting conversation to have about the financing structures of affordable housing when someone is just thinking about building units and the net result could be end of the
And I
day.
don't think it required a union labor. It required the rates, same rates that the union would be paid, had to be paid to the workers. It was a,
There's
so,
AB 211 talked about, maybe it's 4 digits for the ABs, 2111 had to be trained people. So what's the definition of a trained person? It's
and
one
the
thing to.
apprenticeship thing.
Correct, and it's one thing to do that if you're building a type 1 high-rise downtown where there's concrete and steel and electricians, but it's so much different when we're talking about building the Clark Avenue projects, which are basically wood frame construction. You might not need a union tradesperson, but the impacts are quite extensive from a cost standpoint. So you see
And
it.
the details of it will be hammered out probably by us
That's right, or the city council or whomever. But
somewhere
it was-
along the way. It's coming, it'll be coming through the planning commission one way or the other.
I just found that the people at the state level don't quite understand the practical component of construction of a project that they're passing laws. So I thought that was.
I alluded to this earlier. It's like that 60 pages going into this one topic can be solved with this one piece of paper. And it's like, it sounds great, and I'm sure people will vote for it, but I prefer a more nuanced approach, which is what we provide.
Yes.
And
Staff for helping out and including us in that, and it was an eye-opener.
great. Anna, do you have any secretary reports? Anything?
I do. So one of them is that the PICA variance was appealed.
Okay.
That's the 1323 Eolis, in which they asked for the height variance. And that is going to be heard at City Council on October 19th. It was appealed by Kevin Cummins, and the statement was made that he felt that all of the conditions were not evaluated. That was the statement that was made in the appeal. So October 19th is that hearing. And then the other announcement that I wanted to make was that there's EcoFest this Sunday, October 9th, at the Cottonwood Creek Park. And that is from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The Development Services will be there. And that's located at 95 North Vulcan Avenue, if anyone would like to know where that's at. And that's all I have.
Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to adjourn this meeting to our next regular Planning Commission of October 20th. And thank you all for coming, and thank you, members of the public,